This is an exciting time in Scotland, a really exciting time. You get the sense that it's not just a historic debate, but this is a really big debate, you know, whether you want to go back and compare it to, it's the first time in 300 years we've got a chance to decide our own destiny. But you know, the parameters are as wide as any I can remember, and I think there is an incipient incitement about it. I understand completely people saying, well, the debate on independence hasn't really taken off yet because it's all process issues. Will there be one question? Will there be two? Who will have the control of the timetable? 16 and 17-year-olds. And I understand that, but that's about to finish. Those process issues are about to be decided, and I think fail within a matter of weeks probably. And we get down to the real nitty-gritty issue, which is, to answer the question I want to put in front of you tonight, is will working people in Scotland, ourselves, and remember we make up the overwhelming majority of this country, will we be better off under independence? Will we be better off economically? Will we be better off socially? Will we be better off politically? Will we be better off culturally? That's what it comes down to. And I think, well, people will make up their mind essentially on that. They'll say, I think I'm going to be better off. I think the country will have more money, and I think Scotland's social democratic, political left of centre, egalitarian, spirit of fairness, spirit of support and peace will percolate to the top, and this can be a country that can be so much better. And I have to say, you know, that's a process that is still really in its embryonic stages. People are grappling with this just now. People say to me, you know, whether it's the other mums and dads at schools and picking up the wains, or the other dads and mums at the football team, or, you know, when I'm at the football or in the pub or anybody else, and they go, well, see this independence thing, where do you stand? And my answer is, I'm for it because I think we'll be better off. Scottish working class people will be better off. And, you know, in my political life, I've always learned and always cherished a short question merits a short answer. Don't give people a 3-hour peroration about the Declaration of Arbroath, references to Braveheart, William Wallace. You answer the question curtly, astutely and accurately. And for me, what I hope to put in front of you in my remarks briefly here tonight is, I'm convinced working people in Scotland will be better off by independence. But there's two sides there. And the two sides I want to put in front of you is, it stands to reason for me as a logician and somebody who's involved in politics, I engage my intellect I've got, it stands to reason that if all the wealth generated in Scotland, the oil wealth, the income tax that we pay, the VAT, the duty on petrol, the duty on whisky, all the taxes, revenues, levies and wealth that we create in this country stays here, instead of being shipped to London and they in return give us pocket money for a Scottish Parliament, if it all stays here, it seems to me, stands to reason, we'll be better off wealth-wise than we are currently when that doesn't happen. And I think that's something you can get too complicated about sometimes in politics. That, for me, is a truism, it's a fact. But the other thing that I think is related to the same formula of why I'm convinced working people will be better off by, you know, embracing independence, better off with independence is, listen, be absolutely clear. Independence automatically changes nothing. There's no automaticity here. I know one from Motherwell, I grew up in a steel town like yourselves, I know a bit about Scottish history, what it is to be working class, and we get absolutely nothing unless we fight for it. We didn't get the health service handed to us, we didn't get the votes for men and women, working class people, handed to us by the toffs, who studied their Plato and Aristotle and thought it was a good idea. We didn't get a 5-day week. We didn't get, you know, reforms of any kind, the health service, welfare state, unless we fought for it. And I have to say, the good thing is that in Scotland, that's embedded in our culture. We understand we get nothing for nothing. We don't always win the battles, but we have to stand up and we fight for ourselves. And when we do fight for ourselves, not only do we leave a legacy of understanding that's how you advance in the world today, but we have that as part of our historical tradition. So in Scotland, you know, we fought, and Scottish people, particularly here in Red Clydeside, you know, you think of the contribution of the Red Clydesiders, of John Maclean, think of the contribution of people going back to Burns' day, who stood in the way of injustice, who stood in the way of things that were unfair, and they said, I don't care what the consequences are. I'm not having it, we're not having it. And you know, Bill made a reference there, I was a member of the Scottish Parliament for 4 years, and from the SSP corridor you could see outside the building, we were always reminded, our vitality was that whatever happens in this place, this is like a debating club. The real world is the real world, and that's what we're part of. But from my window, there's I don't know if you know Holyrood Park very well, but there's a road that goes up the side of Holyrood Park, and it's called the Radical Road. And you can even see it in A to Z, in the Ordnance Survey, it's called the Radical Road. And it gets its name because weavers in the west of Scotland, in Glasgow, almost 2 centuries ago, who were largely self-employed, you did your own weaving and you sold it, they combined together, the temerity of them, combined together to establish a nascent trade union. And for their pains, I'm afraid to say, they were banished for this city. Don't want the likes of you here, troublemakers. All the weavers will sit at home, they'll do what they're told, they'll weave their cloth, and they'll get buttons, and that'll carry on. And they said no. And they get kicked out of Glasgow. And they ended up in Edinburgh, for relief, as it was called, welfare, as you might call it nowadays. And the great the great aristocrats of Edinburgh decided, we're not having all these Glaswegians hanging about the city doing nothing. I know what we'll do, we'll get them to build a road up the side of Holyrood Park, the Saltbrae Crags, so that the Queen can drive up there on a Sunday afternoon in her carriage and have a nice view of the city. And that's what they did. And it was built by radical weavers from the west of Scotland primarily at that time. That's part of our tradition. I hope you'll, next time you're in Edinburgh, celebrate, take a bit of that road home with you. Why not? That's a souvenir. We've been campaigning in Edinburgh that there should be a plaque. There should be some, description, piece of information for tourists. But they consider that to be litter. Since it's the Queen who owns the park, that's a battle we'll keep at. But the point is, that's your tradition, and that's, we look at our tradition, we look at our culture, and to me that's part and parcel of what this struggle, as Bill and David and Lindsay have said, the struggle for independence is not somehow separate from the class struggle. It's interwoven like those levers. It's one and the same thing. And I have to say to you, knowing that I was coming to Glasgow, rare treat for me, coming to Edinburgh, I decided to bring my passport just to make sure I get in. Now that's a lie. I'll mention my passport in a second because I want to draw one thing to your attention. Inherent in this debate, there's the argument about whether Scotland is a nation or not. If you watch the Olympics and the Paralympics for the last 2 months, you're probably sick to the back teeth, as I am, with the same mistake over and over and over, claiming that Britain is a country. That, they talk about the country, meaning Britain. And of course, Britain's not a country. The countries of Britain are England, Scotland, Wales and the state of Northern Ireland, aren't they? And see if you look at your passport, which you obviously all carry and need, it talks about you're a subject, I'm sorry to tell you, rather than a citizen, as other peoples in the world would want. You're a subject of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. There isn't such a country as Britain. It's a mistake that was repeatedly presented to us, and nobody, the commentators, not the sharpest tacks in the box, are they? They refuse to sort of accept that, this might be more complicated than that. But do you know what I've seen on the other side of my passport? I photocopied it just to bring you that news, but I couldn't help but notice that I'd also unwittingly photocopied the other side of your passport, which reads, and you probably never looked at this before, because I haven't. The other side of the same page says, Her Britannic Majesty's Secretary of State requests and requires, in the name of Her Majesty, all those whom it may concern to allow the bearer, that's the passport holder, to pass freely without let or hindrance, and to afford the bearer such assistance and protection as may be necessary. Which tends to remind you as well that one of the other legacies of the British state is that we are subjects of Her Majesty, and that we live in a monarchy with an unelected and unaccountable hereditary monarch as our head of state, which in some ways reminds you there's not very much modern about the British state, when the countries, if you look across the world, tended to get rid of their kings and queens many centuries ago. The queens got after, they were guillotined in France. There's no king of France, there's no king of Germany, there's no king of Italy, there's no king of America. The kings and queens in those countries, I'm happy to say, they pass through a stage that we have yet to properly accommodate. But the thing I wanted to draw to your attention is that Scotland is a nation. Scotland is not a region of anywhere. We're not a region of England, most certainly not. We're not a region of Britain either. We're a country. And we therefore, international law, political reality, we have the right to determine our future. We have the right to self-determination. And I get people, maybe you do too, I get people who come up to me and go, so you're in favour of independence, that makes you a nationalist. And I says, no, I'm afraid you're mistaken. Supporting the rights of nations to self-determination makes you a democrat. I wouldn't describe myself as a nationalist, but given the confusion here, I'd remind you that Lenin and the Bolsheviks who led the Russian Revolution were passionate about the rights of nations to self-determination. John Maclean from this city, in the early part of the 20th century, passionate about the rights of nations to self-determination. Rosa Luxemburg, James Connolly from the city of Edinburgh, none of them described themselves as nationalists, but they were passionate about independence, and rightly so. And my definition is if you support the rights of nations to self-determination, it makes you a democrat. It doesn't make you a socialist necessarily, but it makes you a democrat, and that's a fundamental point, I think, because failure to understand that at the beginning leads you into all sorts of confusion later on. And I wanted to say that the other, I want to not use the word accusation, but there's a suggestion by others on the left in Britain, more likely, who say, well, socialists who support independence for Scotland are in favour of diminishing working class unity. You're breaking up the power of the working class across Britain. And they'll say in that classic formulation, which is correct, that people in this city of Glasgow, Edinburgh, Dundee, Aberdeen, Paisley, Motherwell, working people in these centres have much more in common with people in Liverpool, Manchester, Plymouth, London, Birmingham, Newcastle, than they do with, let's say, Jim McCall, the billionaire businessman that lives in Monaco, or Sean Connery, or, what was his name, Fred, the bank manager guy? I've blotted them out my memory by, that psychiatrist treatment worked a treat, I can't remember his second name, thank goodness. Good one, thanks for reminding me not. Anyway, the truth of the matter is, we do have much more in common with workers in those cities. I had the great benefit of living in London for 10 years. I feel affinity with the place, I understand it. As an aside, I lived in Stratford for 10 years. It's one of the poorest areas of Britain. The Olympic site, I took my kids there to show my daughter where she was born. It's still one of the poorest parts of Britain. People in that area have got probably 2 months' work wearing a purple and red jacket as an Olympic steward in point people direction, and then they'll go back to mass unemployment, which affects that area badly. But the point I'd make to those who suggest that independence for Scotland somehow breaks up the unity of the working class, this is a false formulation. Of course, people in Glasgow, working people here, have more in common Manchester, Liverpool, London and elsewhere than they do with the rich and the employers in Scotland. But the same thing can be said about the working people in Buenos Aires, and Beijing, and Moscow, and Munich, and Johannesburg, or wherever, or Dublin. But socialists don't therefore argue, well, you see, and I know, if you pick up Johannesburg, and you think of New Delhi, and you think of Dublin, these are former colonies of Britain, aren't they? So we don't argue, well, we're against independence for India, for Ireland, for South Africa, and anywhere else, because it will break up the unity of the working class of these countries. That's a false formulation, and not least it's redundant from my point of view, because I work for a polling company now, and one of the surveys I do, or all the surveys, virtually all the surveys that they do, they ask people, where were you born? Scotland, wherever. How do you describe yourself? Scottish or British? And virtually nobody describes themselves as British anymore. It's an identity question. People consider themselves Scottish. They look at you like, oh, that's a stupid question. Now, it's no longer an issue that they consider. Now, that has changed. After the Second World War, my grandpa and my granny and Motherwell, they considered themselves British. They'd fought the World War together. Britain was responsible for providing a welfare state, educating their kids. Reforms were won. But the world has moved on. And in this regard, this accusation about socialists who support independence for Scotland breaking up the working class movement in Britain, it's not only redundant, it's false. Because in an independent Scotland, Glasgow will still be where it is. You know, Carlisle will still be where it is. Geographically, the unity of the working class is still entirely possible, you know, in a struggle on that basis in the future as it is. The second question, and if I run through them quickly, you'll forgive me, but I'm focused in these remarks about what it is the other side of the debate say. You know, better together. And if you look at the Better Together website, you know they've got the workers for Dublin Shipyard, British Aerospace, the shop stewards there. And one of their presentations is that you're safer and stronger as part of the United Kingdom, don't they? And in part of the debate they say Scotland's too wee to be independent. It'd be too poor to be independent. We don't have the capacity to govern ourselves and determine our own future. And when you looked at the Olympics, 240 countries came to the Olympics. Lo and behold, a country like ours of 5.25 million was about the average. Bear in mind, not every country in the world has got the population of China or India with their billions. When it boiled down to it, The Guardian, I used to follow it a little bit, had a league table of medals that wasn't based on the medals won. It was based on, given the population of the countries, how they'd done relative to their population size. And Croatia was the top, because it's a country of only 350,000 that won more medals pro rata as a proportion of their population. So when you looked at it, Scotland's entirely average in this regard in terms of its size. So that's a redundant argument. And then they say, well, Bill, the trouble is, look, the same, if you remember the debate in the 70s, as I referred to it, I've read about it. The debate was largely about, well, Scotland, I'm afraid, we'd just be too poor. We would. We'd just be eating porridge all day, drinking whisky in the evening, and that would be us. We'd be humpty, it'd be a rubbish place to stay, we're too poor, we couldn't run our own affairs. And now when you look at it, and of course the measure, and the British government has been forced to describe the GDP of Scotland, Wales, England, and lo and behold, GDP per head of the population in Scotland, as it currently stands, is the 6th highest in Europe. So here we are, we have oil, and by the way, one of the big focuses with the meeting in Edinburgh last night, a chap asked a very reasonable question about, the whole environmental implications of oil and carbon and gas and the rest of it. And one of the points that was raised was, should Scotland take the oil at the North Sea? We discussed it, it was a very interesting issue to raise. But what developed was that, of course, Scotland has got a considerable potential in the next phase of energy production, which is renewables. I travelled down to Kilmarnock the other day, and you look at the Fenwick Moors beaches, it's like, it's like Turbine City, it's like there's a factory making windmills there. You've got tidal powers, all these renewable sources, and Scotland has got a huge potential. You get energy experts giving symposiums and now saying, potentially speaking, what we opened up with the North Sea and gas and electricity, oil and gas, the potential for tidal and all these forms of renewable energy is potentially as large. And you have to say that's an enormous gift from the gods that we didn't earn it ourselves really to benefit. So Scotland's wealth for me is there, and it's an argument. I noticed the argument just now from the Better Together campaign. They say, well, of course, Alistair Darling, of course Scotland could be a rich wee country. As if to say, well, that's what we always argued. You say, no, in the 70s the argument was we were humpty, we were rubbish, we'd be counting beads like some African country or that, we'd be poor, we'd have nothing. No, of course we'd be a rich country. It's just that we'd be even richer, even better off as part of the Union. And at the Better Together website, you've got the workers at British Aerospace and the Clyde that govern, and they're saying, look, part of Britain, we have this aircraft carrier that we get to build. And I think this very much takes us on to the territory that David's talking about. Because I have to say, I worry about the SNP's decision to accommodate NATO. Remember, puts them straight into the same place where Labour sits currently, where the Tories sit currently, where the Liberals sit currently. I think people in a landslide way in 2011 voted for the SNP because they weren't like Labour. They weren't like all the others. They offered us prescription charges. A bill the SSP piloted, the SNP took it on, immense credit's due to them. They piloted schemes for free school meals, they were against the council tax, made noises about it. That distinguished them from Labour. This change of policy, if it goes through, is the same as Labour. It's the same as the Tories. It's the same as the Liberals. And I have to say, I met with Angus Robertson. And he basically said, Angus said, this is about neutralising what the SNP sees in Achilles' heel. This is about neutralising Labour saying, aha, the SNP will endanger us. This country won't be safe. Their defence policy's a joke. And instead of standing up, as the Scottish Socialist Party says, and as our forefathers and foremothers said, Hamish Henderson, John Maclean and others, who is it we're defending ourselves from that we need to be the 5th biggest arms manufacturer in the world? Who is it that's invading us? In my lifetime and yours, there are Scottish soldiers today occupying Afghanistan. There are Scottish soldiers who have occupied and invaded Iraq. There were Scottish aircraft and pilots bombing Libya. We're not defending ourselves The British state doesn't defend anything. You've now got this great oxymoron, the word defence. It's like Orwellian speak. The word defence means attack, attack, attack. Britain has got the 5th biggest military in the world, the 5th biggest arms manufacturer in the world. And this policy about saying Scotland should be part of that, Scotland should be one of the 9 countries who have nuclear weapons. Only 9 countries out of those 300 that I mentioned have got nuclear weapons, and we're one of them. I went, when I was in the Scottish Parliament, to Cape Town with the Homeless World Cup. It was held in Cape Town, I think, in 2006. And I remember meeting homeless people and their support workers and organisations around about them. And of course the Iraq War's on there, Afghanistan's on there, Britain was voting to a 2nd generation of nuclear weapons. And people would say to me, it really threw me, I have to be honest with you, again and again, through interpreters in English, they went, what is it you're so angry about? Why is it you're having to attack everybody all the time? And of course, I'm thinking, oh, I'm from Scotland, you know, Sean Connery, groundkeeper Willie for The Simpsons, Kenny Dalglish, Iron Brew, Square Slice Sausage. We give all these great things to the world. I was looking for a bit of nice to see you, good fellow, Burns, and all I got was this kind of, a whole wall of people saying, you know, my country's no in Iraq. My country doesn't lick the arse of the Americans and follow them into war. My country doesn't have nuclear weapons. Why do you, what is it you're so angry about? And of course, it throws you because you're expecting a warm welcome and everybody loves Scotland, and that's what we're led to believe, isn't it? That that's part of our culture. Everybody loves you and you have a pint with them in a pub. And here they are. You know, there's a sense of this is an aggressive nation, this is a bully, they go around the world, invading countries, we poor countries, Afghanistan at that time, 2nd poorest country in the world, we're the 5th richest and we invade them. And I have to say, the socialist, the progressive movement in Scotland's policy is worth $1 million, because the argument is we don't need to be spending money in nuclear weapons, we don't need to be spending money in armies, we don't need money to be spent in aircraft carriers in the Clyde. We want shipyard workers to be building ferries to the islands. We want shipyard workers to be building ships that we used to do, that were for peaceful uses, that were for cruise liners, and that's what we built our reputation on. Now in Scotland, you look across the country, show me anywhere in the country where there's volume manufacturing in this country that isn't related to Ministry of Defence contracts, and defence and threatening the world with nuclear annihilation or weapons of mass destruction. In Edinburgh and the Ferry Road, there is British Aerospace, there's Marconi, there's GEC, there's Ferranti, and what do they make? Rapier-guided missile systems. Missile systems for helicopters and airships and all the rest of it, and then they export them to any dictator who's got enough dollars to pay for them. That's not a reputation I want. That's not the independent Scotland that I want to see, nor you, nor I would put it to you, the vast majority of citizens of this country. And that, to me, that make no apologies for that. That's wrapped up in what independence is about. That's about making this country a beacon to the rest of the world, rather than a country that terrifies the rest of the world. Hamish Henderson wrote a poem, a ballad called The Freedom Come All Ye. If you've read it, you'll remember there's a line in it where he casts the notion about so many countries throughout the world for whom the sight of the tartan and the skill of the bagpipes terrifies them, because for them it's associated with tanks and soldiers and the slaughter of their families under the guise of British imperialism. That's not something to be proud of. That's not something we want to continue with for a second longer. And if the second thing I can say before I really finish, Bill, is one of the points that John Maclean made at the Edinburgh meeting last night, which I thought was a wonderful point to make. You know, there's a sense about, look, as it currently stands, they say there's 30% of the population in Scotland in favour of independence. There's 30%, as they say, who are dead in the wool against it, and there's 40% in the middle. That's roughly what they say, isn't it? And so the contention is put forward, how do we persuade the 40% to come over to our side? That's the $64 million question in a way. And there's one point of view which is to say, look, just tell them, call Canny, easy as she goes, keep things as they are, and they'll come out our point of view, because they're frightened of independence, they're fearful of what it means, the insecurity, the safety. You keep that 40% and you say, call Canny, keep the heat, we'll keep the Queen, we'll keep the pound, we'll keep NATO, we'll keep the euro, we'll keep part of things as they are. And my point, my contention is that's a total waste of time. Because unless you convince the 40% in the middle that independence means addressing the absolutely disgraceful inequalities in this city. A third of the kids living in Glasgow go to bed hungry every day in the 21st century in the 6th richest country in the world. This city, and I dare, I'll take my hands and my mouth in my hands, even mentioning Thatcher's name, but I remember mass unemployment where this city was used as a guinea pig, not just for the poll tax, but for disability living allowance, because they were under so much pressure with mass unemployment, they took tens of thousands of people in Glasgow and said, you're not unemployed anymore. Your benefits is disability living allowance. You've got asbestosis for working in the yards or the engineering firms or for the pits or anything else. And you've got disability, people with disability in this city now having to jump through hoops to qualify for benefits that are entitled to. There are vicious conditions in this country, in this city. There are vicious conditions the length and breadth of Britain, length and breadth of Scotland. One of them that came out last week when Scottish and Southern Electric announced another 9% rise in their gas and electric bills. The government announced there's now 1 million households in Scotland, 1 in 3, living in fuel poverty. They don't have the money to pay £1,500 for gas and electricity. So I tell you what, just keep things as they are. It's a recipe for defeat, I'm afraid. It's a recipe for defeat. We're never going to win this debate in independence if we say to people, the damp house you're living in Castlemilk, you'll still be living there after independence. The fuel poverty you suffer, the child that can't have a pair of proper shoes this winter in Glasgow, that's going to continue after independence because the rich need to be placated. The billionaires need to be assured that they can become billionaires again under independence. And again, as I said at the very beginning, the class issues, the understanding of social conditions, that's the driving influence for independence. And when I've been involved in the Yes Scotland Advisory Board, and I'm delighted to be part of a huge movement for independence. And that's what it is. The Yes campaign is a movement. It's not a political party. It's made up of many political parties. The Scottish Socialist Party proudly can say, way back in 2005, we were one of the 3 parties that came together to establish the Scottish Independence Convention. The Scottish Socialist Party, the Greens and the SNP, as well as Civic Scotland and entertainers and academics and writers and the whole panoply. We established the Scottish Independence Convention in 2005, which in many ways is the mother of Yes Scotland. It's the mother of the Yes campaign, the independence movement. And throughout it, the Scottish Socialist Party says we're delighted to be part of it. We share a passionate belief in independence has been the first step to a better society. We are for an independent socialist Scotland, a modern democratic republic where the people of this country are in charge of the corporations rather than vice versa. We make that clear, that's our vision, that's in the traditions of Maclean and Connolly and so many others. That's where we stand, and our partners in the Greens and the SNP, everybody else, they understood and they accepted it. They understood and they were delighted to hear the passionate arguments that we have. And that remains the case. We don't favour a monarchy. We think it's a ridiculous relic of the past. We're Democrats. We want an elected head of state. We don't favour Scotland threatening the rest of the world as part of NATO or nuclear weapons. We want those corporations who employ people and those people together make profits, and we want to see that profit reinvested in society to build proper housing for this city, healthcare we can be proud of, social services that are necessary for the 21st century, and that the great wealth of the country is invested in the people of this country and is not sent to Monaco or the Cayman Islands to avoid paying tax. That's the kind of society we want. And I have to say, it's been a great delight, the Scottish Socialist Party, and it's only just beginning this whole debate of independence. There are many, many people, and we'll see it, as I said before, at the demonstration in the march a week on Saturday in Edinburgh. There are many, many people now looking at independence and saying, what does it mean? How will things change? And if it's for change, then I'll be part of it. And you're seeing more and more people getting involved in it. And I'm delighted to say, and I hope that you are too, that the momentum behind the Yes campaign, between the movement for independence, is far, far in excess of the other side. You know, the other side, you see, I've seen that Charlie Gordon tweeted a man of this parish until recently, as they say, don't they? And he sent a tweet which Salmond got, and it was about Charlie Gordon saying the Tories' money and Labour activists better together, ? In other words, of course, the Labour Party's got a great crisis, not the first time, but a great crisis they faced, that they're now in bed with the Tories. They're now in bed with the Tories, and as somebody said last night, he'd have thought a party that had at least the prospect or the potential, the opportunity or the chance in 2016, the next Scottish Parliament elections after independence, Labour surely has a chance to form the government, doesn't it? But they'd rather not take that chance, they'd rather sleep with the Tories, sleep with the enemy, get in with the Liberals and the Tories to prevent that from happening. And by the way, who would ever have thought in our lifetime, politics is a funny thing, who would ever have thought there was a party less popular amongst working people than the Tories? And yet the Liberal Democrats have managed to achieve it, you know. And I think it's an indication of we have progress on our side, we have a vision, we have something better we're offering the people of Scotland. The other side, they're offering them the same nuclear weapons, the same military alliance, the same belligerence, the same recession, the worst in 80 years, and the idea that unemployment in Glasgow will be here forevermore, poverty will be here forevermore, there's nothing you can do about it. Well, that's a counsel of despair, and we reject it. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Colin. Again, I'll open the discussion up. Any points or questions for Colin or for David?